Eyes, if you're willing, to think of yourself as a sheep with a shepherd, a sheep not alone and by yourself, but as part of a community of sheep, a flock of sheep. I have some small experience with sheep. And I have to say, I don't always want to identify myself as a sheep because sheep have many characteristics. Some are wonderful and some are somewhat limiting. But I'm thinking of myself today as a sheep that has a shepherd, somebody to guide me as I wander around, as I go this way and that, because sometimes I go this way and I go that way without knowing quite where I'm going or why I'm going. And so this morning, as we wander in our minds, at least, through the space of our lives, think of yourself as somebody with a shepherd. It says in Psalm 23, God is my shepherd. Adonai Roi, my shepherd. It seems and sounds so intensely personal, almost individual, until you think of sheep rarely existing by themselves. So you are here in the sheepfold, whether you're physically present in the sanctuary or you're watching with us online. We are all part of the fold of God, the community of God, the beloved family of God, a very big family. And as we wander following our shepherd, we hear in the psalm that God makes us lie down. God makes us lie down, causes us to stretch out. It says literally, stretch out. So I invite you, where you are comfortably in your pew, to stretch out a little bit if you can do that without harming those near you. God makes us stretch out. When I read Psalm 23, I think of Newton's first law of motion, don't you? The tendency of a body at rest to remain at rest. The tendency of a body in motion to remain in motion unless acted upon by an outside force. I think sometimes God needs to act as an outside force on our bodies that are constantly in motion, our lives that are constantly in motion. Act upon us as that outside force to say, hey, stop. Rest, recharge. As Brooke reminded us a few weeks ago during Lent, rest is a revolutionary act. Rest in our culture is a revolutionary act. But of course, the psalm doesn't stay there with us lying down in our beautiful green pastures, which I hope you can see in your mind's eye. Because a moment later, God is leading us again as a shepherd, leading us beside the still waters. God is leading us beside the still waters, and all these things are done not for their own sake, but for the sake of restoring our soul, because our God is in the business of soul restoration, restoring our souls. And of course, if we don't stop there but continue to read, we find out that the reason our souls are restored is that we have paths to walk. And they are the paths of tzedakah in Hebrew, the path of righteousness, the path of justice, the path that leads through God's will and God's way. And not for our own sake, so people can look at us and say, oh, look at those righteous people. Look at that person who just does justice and exudes righteousness everywhere they go. But for the sake, what? For the sake of God's holy name. For the sake of God's name. All right, let us continue with our soul restoration process of meditating on Psalm 23 through those paths of righteousness. Our natural paths don't always lead towards righteousness. Pastor Lee and I were at B'nai Jeshurun yesterday for the bar mitzvah of Aiden, Rabbi Felicia's oldest kid. And Aiden said at one point that walking through life, we contribute to injustice. If we're unconscious, if we're not thinking about what we're doing, if we're not in tune with Adonai, with God, we contribute to injustice. We are not by nature perfect. It takes some thought and it takes some consciousness for us to walk a different path, to walk a path of tzedakah, of righteousness. And we walk that path for the sake of God's holy name. It seems a little strange to me that the psalmist would insist that the things we do or fail to do, the things that we say or the things that we fail to say, would cast a shadow not on us, but on the reputation of God. But that is what Psalm 23 insists for us. Let's keep going, because Psalm 23 says God keeps us going. Sometimes walking the paths of tzedakah, of justice, will put us in uncomfortable situations. Even though I walk in a valley of deep shadows, a valley of threat and danger, a precarious place, I will fear no evil. We're called as people of faith to be truth tellers, to speak truth without fearing the consequences of offending people who have some hold over us, some power over us. But we fear no evil because we're not alone when we do that. We're not by ourselves when we do that. We fear no evil because God is with us. Doing justice, God is with you. Speaking righteousness, God is with you. And God does not show up with you and for you empty-handed. Your rod and your staff, it says. God, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Now, I know that the staff is like a shepherd's crook to use to gently guide the sheep and keep us sheep in line. And I've always thought of the rod as something used to ward off wolves and thieves. But I was talking with Rabbi Roli and I yesterday about this psalm, and Roli tells me that Shebet is more like a cane, something to prop us up, something to hold us up. And so maybe that's a hint, if that's so, maybe that's a hint not of God's strength on our behalf, but of God's vulnerability on our behalf. And that vulnerability is demonstrated in the next line, because in addition to being called into shadowy, uncomfortable places, like that valley, God calls me to sit down at a table surrounded by my enemies. Literally, it says, charar, those who distress me, who seek to hem me in and restrict me, who seem to be hostile towards me, and for no reason, I'm sure. Pause for a moment with me. See if you can think about who it is in your life who causes you distress right now. Someone who maybe for little or no reason shows hostility towards you, who keeps you hemmed in and narrowed. And think about sitting in their presence at a table prepared for you by our shepherd God. I wonder if Jesus had that verse in mind when in Luke's gospel we see Jesus going to have lunch at the house of a Pharisee, surrounded by Pharisees who are not always his friends. And so in this psalm we see God not in strength, but in this comforting vulnerability, inviting us not to put distance between us and such people, although sometimes we know we have to do that, but to be who we are, fully who we are, in the presence of those people. And if God promises us not only to be there with us, but also to bless us and anoint us in their presence, to show favor, to show blessing to us and on us, in the presence of those who don't think that highly of us, because God thinks so highly of us. Which brings us to the end of our meditation together. Surely goodness and mercy, tov and chesed, goodness and deep, vulnerable love will follow us. We don't have to go seeking it. It's going to be following us. It is following us right now, today, tomorrow, next week, and for the rest of our lives as we choose to make a home in God's home, holding on to that divine hand that stretches out to reach for us in love. Amen.